A single mother accepts a job bathing a millionaire, and the unexpected happens. Amelie had always been a fighter, but in recent months even her resilience was wearing thin. At just 19, she faced the world with Roman cradled in her arms. Now, 6 years later, Roman's needs were growing, as were the bills. Unemployed and without any promising prospects, she spent her nights holding back tears and her mornings searching for hope in places where none seemed to exist. But on this particular day, something changed. On the small kitchen table, next to the stale bread, lay a piece of paper left by her neighbor. Amelie held the ad with trembling fingers, reading and rereading every word, as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Private caregiver for high-end residents, demanding work, excellent salary, seeking discretion and commitment. Her heart skipped a beat. What exactly did demanding mean? Could someone like her, whose life was marked by simplicity and struggle, really stand a chance? Yet, the promise of an excellent salary meant the possibility of a better school for Roman, a home where he could play freely, and nights where she wouldn't have to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying groceries. Amelie took a deep breath. This could be the turning point she desperately needed, or it could be the start of a new challenge that would change her life forever. The next morning, Amelie stood before the towering gates of the mansion. As the imposing iron gates creaked open, they revealed a garden so meticulously maintained it seemed almost otherworldly. She was greeted at the door by a housekeeper named Aurora, who offered a polite yet reserved smile. "Welcome. I'll take you to Mr. Foster, but be warned. He's exacting and straightforward. Just be honest," Aurora advised, her voice steady and professional. Amelie nodded, her palms damp with nervousness as she followed Aurora through the hushed hallways. When they reached the office, Aurora opened the door, and for the first time, Amelie saw Julian Foster. He sat in a wheelchair, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, but what struck her most were his eyes, cold, calculating, and almost daring her to falter. "Are you the candidate?" he asked, his tone sharp and to the point. "Yes, sir," Amelie replied, summoning all the confidence she could muster. Julian studied her for a moment, his head tilting slightly. "Why do you want this job?" Amelie took a deep breath. "I'm a single mother, I want to give my son a better future, and I'm willing to work hard for it." A brief silence followed, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, with a subtle motion, Julian turned his wheelchair away. "Start tomorrow. Don't disappoint me." That evening, as Amelie tucked Roman into bed, she felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, hope, and a lingering unease. This job could be the opportunity she needed, but there was something about Julian's piercing gaze that made her suspect there was more to this mansion than met the eye. The following morning, Amelie arrived for her first day of work. Aurora greeted her once more, this time with less formality but the same efficient demeanor. "Come with me. I'll explain your responsibilities as we walk," Aurora said, her voice clear and composed. As they moved through the sprawling, silent corridors, Aurora explained, "Mr. Julian Foster follows a strict routine. Your primary duty will be assisting him with bathing and dressing. He prefers everything to be quick and efficient. One more thing, he dislikes unnecessary chatter. Keep it professional." Amelie swallowed nervously, nodding as she absorbed each instruction. Aurora's tone was calm and steady, but it did little to erase Julian's words from the day before. "Don't disappoint me." Those words echoed in her mind, a stark reminder that failure was not an option. In the master bathroom, Chloe's eyes took in the assistive equipment, tailored for Julian's needs. Side rails lined the walls, a specialized shower bench stood by the tiled stall, and a small table displayed an array of expensive-looking products, meticulously organized. Before she could fully absorb her surroundings, the door swung open and Julian entered, expertly maneuvering his wheelchair with practiced ease. "Let's get started. I don't have all day," he said bluntly, his voice clipped and businesslike, not sparing her even a glance. Chloe snapped out of her thoughts and nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." She moved swiftly to adjust the bench, ensuring it was secure for his transfer. Determined to perform her duties with precision, she tried to focus, but her gaze involuntarily lingered on the scars lining his hands as he gripped the rails tightly. He didn't ask for help, but his body language spoke volumes, revealing a struggle he refused to voice. Standing close by, ready to assist if necessary, Chloe kept her posture attentive but non-intrusive. "Don't treat me like an invalid," Julian snapped suddenly, his tone sharp and defensive, slicing through the silence. Caught off guard but maintaining her composure, Chloe responded softly. "That's not what I'm doing. I just want to ensure your safety." Julian scoffed, his expression hardening, but he offered no rebuttal. An uncomfortable silence filled the room, broken only by the rhythmic sound of running water. As she gently soaped his shoulders, Chloe noticed a deep, jagged scar tracing its way down his back. Her hand hesitated for a moment, curiosity sparking, but she wisely kept her questions to herself. Not yet. After helping Julian dress, Chloe quietly began tidying up the bathroom. From the corner of his eye, Julian watched her movements, his gaze calculating, as if he were piecing together a puzzle. "You seem to be handling this well," he remarked, his tone more challenging than complimentary. "I've been through tougher things," Chloe answered with measured honesty, her voice calm yet guarded. She offered no further explanation. Julian's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, before he turned his wheelchair toward the door. He left without another word, his departure as abrupt as his entrance. The rest of the day was a series of meticulous instructions from Aurora, punctuated by moments of tense interaction with Julian. He was never outright rude, but his demeanor was always commanding, his presence an unspoken reminder of who held control. Despite his cold exterior, Chloe noticed small inconsistencies that hinted at a more complex truth. The way his fingers tightened on his wheelchair's armrests when someone stood too close, and how his eyes would drift away whenever the conversation touched on personal matters. During lunch, Chloe met Eliza for the first time. The woman glided into the dining room with an elegance that bordered on arrogance, her presence commanding attention. Her designer dress hugged her figure perfectly, her perfume left a lingering trail of expensive notes, and her gaze was icy and appraising. "So, you're the new caregiver?" Eliza's voice was honeyed, but her smile was devoid of warmth. "Yes, I'm Chloe," she replied evenly, her tone respectful but firm, refusing to appear intimidated. Eliza's eyes scanned her from head to toe, a brief flicker of disdain flashing across her face. She let out a short, dismissive laugh before turning to Julian. "I hope you don't give her too much trouble. She seems fragile." The last word was laced with condescension. Julian's face remained impassive, but Chloe didn't miss the subtle tightening of his jaw. The tension was palpable, a silent battle waged in glances and unspoken words. It was clear that Eliza took pleasure in provoking, and Chloe realized she would need to tread carefully around her in the future. Later, as Chloe tidied up the guest rooms, her phone vibrated. It was Roman, calling from the neighbor's phone. The sound of his cheerful voice was the first genuine relief she'd felt all day. Hearing him laugh, even from miles away, renewed her resolve. Whatever challenges awaited her in this mansion, she would face them for him. "Mom, how is work? Is the house big?" Roman's voice was filled with excitement. Amelie's heart softened, but she kept her tone light. "It's different, sweetheart, but I'm managing. Did you eat properly with Annelle?" "Yes, but I wish you were here." His voice grew softer, tinged with longing. Amelie's chest tightened, but she forced herself to sound cheerful. "I wish I was there too, my love, but I'm doing this for us. Now, be good and go to bed early, okay?" After hanging up, Amelie stared at the phone, her fingers lingering on the screen. Working at the mansion was a world away from the life she was used to, and the distance from Roman weighed heavily on her, yet she knew she had to endure it for his sake. Later that evening, Aurora found Amelie in the kitchen wiping down the countertops. "You did well today. Mr. Foster didn't complain, and that's always a good sign," Aurora said with a reassuring smile. Amelie let out a small sigh. "He seems complicated." Aurora chuckled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Complicated is putting it mildly. But that's better than how he was at the beginning. The accident changed him. He lost more than just his ability to walk. He lost his trust in people." Before Amelie could ask more, Julian's figure appeared in the doorway. His presence was commanding, even in silence. "I'll need you early tomorrow," he said, his eyes locked on Amelie. "Be punctual." "Of course, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her. Once he left, Aurora placed a comforting hand on Amelie's shoulder. "You're doing fine. He just needs time." The next morning, Amelie arrived at the mansion before sunrise, the sky still tinged with hues of dawn. In the kitchen, Aurora was already bustling around, preparing a steaming cup of tea. "Getting used to the routine yet?" Aurora asked, handing her a mug. Amelie took a grateful sip, letting the warmth spread through her fingers. "I'm learning, but he's complicated," she admitted, choosing her words carefully. Aurora laughed, a light, genuine sound. "Complicated is the politest description I've heard. But he wasn't always like this. Not entirely. The accident changed everything." Amelie's curiosity was piqued, but before she could press for more details, a faint rhythmic tapping echoed down the hall. Aurora's expression shifted instantly. "That's his signal. He needs something," she explained. "Go on. You're doing well." Amelie squared her shoulders and made her way to the living room. Julian sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the sprawling gardens outside, his shoulders tense despite his seemingly relaxed posture. He looked like a man lost in thought, but there was an alertness about him, a guardedness he never fully let down. "I'm ready to assist you, sir," Amelie said, her voice calm and steady. Julian turned his wheelchair to face her, one eyebrow arching in challenge. "We'll see how long you can keep saying that with conviction." Amelie didn't rise to the bait. She simply nodded and made her way to the kitchen to prepare his morning medications. She was beginning to understand that his words were designed to test her resilience more than anything else. Halfway down the hallway, she felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Turning around, she found herself face to face with Eliza. "Good morning," Eliza greeted, her smile saccharine sweet, dripping with false politeness. "I trust you're finding the job stimulating?" Amelie matched her tone, refusing to show any discomfort. "It's challenging but necessary." Eliza's eyes narrowed, the mask slipping just enough to reveal a glimmer of hostility. "You should remember one thing. You're replaceable. Don't get too comfortable." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Amelie kept her face neutral, offering no response as she continued on her way, feeling Eliza's icy gaze boring into her back, until she rounded the corner. Once out of sight, Amelie took a deep breath. The mansion was beautiful, almost enchanting, but behind its pristine walls lurked power plays and secrets she was only beginning to uncover. She had to stay focused, both for her job and for romance. The day unfolded with routine tasks and the constant, piercing presence of Julian, who seemed to test Amelie at every opportunity. During the bath, as the water cascaded quietly, Julian broke the silence with a question that took her by surprise. "Why are you really here?" Amelie paused, her hands momentarily still. "I've told you before, I want to secure a better future for my son." Julian let out a short, almost bitter laugh. "It's always the same story. Everyone claims to do something for someone else, but in the end, it's always for themselves." His words were cold, cutting deep with their cynicism, but Amelie refused to back down. "Maybe it's hard for you to believe, but not everyone is the same." Julian's eyes flickered for a moment before looking away, his jaw tightening. Amelie realized then that beneath his rigid demeanor was more than bitterness. There was pain. A deep wound he kept fiercely guarded. Later, as Amelie tidied Julian's room, her eyes were drawn to a box of old photographs. Curiosity got the better of her, and she picked up one picture that stood out. Julian, standing tall and smiling beside a woman she recognized as Eliza. They looked happy, but there was something about Eliza's smile. It was too perfect, almost staged. Ahead Amelie could put the photo back, Julian's voice cut through the quiet. "Do you always go through other people's things?" She spun around, guilt washing over her. "I was just..." Julian raised a hand, silencing her. "It doesn't matter. You want to know what happened, don't you? Everyone does. They look at me and see a mystery waiting to be solved." Amelie hesitated. She hadn't meant to invade his privacy, but the accusation in his voice made her feel as if she had crossed an invisible line. "If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. You don't owe anyone an explanation." She placed the photo back in the box, her movements careful and respectful. For a moment, Julian's expression softened. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his voice dropped to a murmur. That photo was taken before the accident, before everything fell apart. He turned and left without another word, leaving Amelie standing amidst the ghosts of his past, questions swirling in her mind. At lunchtime, Amelie's phone vibrated with a familiar number. Roman's cheerful voice was the highlight of her day. "Mom, have you seen the garden? Is it pretty?" Amelie smiled, her heart warming. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You'd love it. Maybe one day I can take you here." Roman giggled. "What about the man in the chair? Is he nice?" Amelie paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's different, but I'm learning how to manage." After hanging up, Amelie felt a wave of longing wash over her. The mansion was grand and mesmerizing, but it was also a cold, isolating place. She reminded herself why she was there. For Roman. Later, as she organized the kitchen cabinets, Aurora walked in holding a small package. "This was delivered for you," she said, handing it over. Amelie opened the package to find an anonymous note. Its words were simple, yet dripping with malice. "Watch your step." A chill ran down her spine. Her first thought was of Eliza, but she knew she couldn't accuse anyone without proof. She showed the note to Aurora, whose face grew serious. "Strange. I'll look into it, but be careful, Amelie. Not everyone here likes change." Amelie nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. Who would want to intimidate her? By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she was more determined than ever to see this job through. As she finished her final task, she passed by the library and saw Julian sitting alone, staring at an open book. But his eyes weren't moving. He wasn't reading. He was lost in thought, his shoulders heavy with an unseen burden. "Do you need anything, sir?" she asked, her voice gentle. Julian looked up, his eyes tired and distant. "You always ask that, don't you? Don't you get tired of trying to help?" Amelie met his gaze without flinching. "It's my job," she answered simply, though her voice carried more sincerity than she intended. Julian studied her for a moment, his icy exterior cracking just slightly. "Maybe you're not like the others," he murmured, almost to himself. It was the first time Amelie heard anything close to vulnerability in his voice, and for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. The next day dawned gray, a light rain misting the mansion's gardens. Amelie woke, determined to push aside the mystery of the note and focus on her work. When she entered Julian's room that morning, he was more reserved than usual. He appeared at the bathroom door, his expression as cold and guarded as ever. "Good morning, sir," Amelie greeted, hoping to ease the tension. Julian didn't respond but gestured for her to begin. She was getting used to his silence, recognizing it as a shield he used to keep the world at a distance. As she helped him through his morning routine, Amelie noticed something unusual. Julian's shoulders were less rigid, his posture more relaxed. He avoided eye contact as always, but he allowed her to work without his usual sharp remarks or defensive body language. For a moment, Amelie saw a glimpse of the man behind the walls, the man who once smiled in the photo, standing tall and full of life. It was fleeting, but it was there, and it gave her hope that perhaps those walls weren't as unbreakable as they seemed. "Sir," Amelie began hesitantly, choosing her words carefully. "The weather today is perfect for a walk in the garden. Maybe we could—" "No." His voice was sharp, cutting through her suggestion before she could finish. His tone was as cold as the wind rustling outside the window. Amelie sighed, but didn't push the matter. Even so, she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in him, the faint softening around his eyes, the way his shoulders weren't quite as tense. Small details, almost imperceptible, but significant to someone who spent as much time with him as she did. Later, while organizing Julian's bedroom closet, Amelie stumbled upon a dusty photo album tucked away on the top shelf. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the worn cover, but curiosity won out. She gently opened it, revealing photographs of Julian before the accident, standing tall, his smile bright and unguarded, surrounded by friends and family. One photo in particular caught her eye. In it, Julian was embracing a woman with sparkling eyes, his expression one of unfiltered happiness. They looked so alive, so unburdened by the shadows that now haunted him. "I remember that day." Julian's voice startled her, his presence suddenly filling the doorway. He watched her intently, his gaze unreadable. Amelie's heart raced. She quickly placed the album back on the shelf. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." His voice was quiet, a hint of melancholy woven into his words. "That was before. a time that no longer exists. Amelie heard the heaviness in his tone, the weight of memories just out of reach. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man behind the defenses. "You were happy," she murmured, the words escaping before she could stop them. Julien let out a laugh, but it was hollow, devoid of joy. "Happiness is overrated. What matters is control, and that's what I've lost. Maybe not entirely." Amelie's heart tightened at the rawness of his confession. "You can still choose how to face things," she said softly, her voice gentle but firm. Julien didn't reply. His face was expressionless, his emotions guarded once more. Without another word, he turned his wheelchair and left the room. As the echo of his wheels faded down the hallway, Amelie felt a pang of sadness. The man in the photographs seemed so distant from the one she had just spoken to, and yet she could see glimpses of him still lingering beneath the surface. At lunch, Amelie found Eliza already seated at the table, poised and elegant as ever. Her posture was impeccable, her movements graceful, but Amelie noticed a certain tension in her demeanor, an undercurrent of unease that she tried to hide behind a practiced smile. "Are you enjoying the job, Amelie?" Eliza's voice was smooth, her words polite but laced with a subtle edge. "Yes, ma'am," Amelie replied, keeping her gaze focused on her plate, her tone neutral and respectful. Eliza leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Julien can be difficult. I hope you know how to handle that. He needs someone who understands their place." The words were carefully chosen, a warning wrapped in false concern. Amelie felt the sting of Eliza's remark, but maintained her composure. "I do my best to fulfill my role." Eliza's smile widened, satisfied by the obedient response. "Good. I'd hate to see you struggle." Amelie's heart quickened, but she kept her expression neutral, her body language unassuming. As Eliza sipped her tea with a calculated elegance, Amelie realized just how dangerous she could be. It was a reminder that in this mansion, appearances were often deceiving, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. In the late afternoon, while dusting the shelves in the library, Amelie's phone vibrated. Seeing Roman's name light up the screen, she quickly answered, her heart instantly lighter. "Mommy, I drew you today." Roman's voice was bursting with excitement, his joy palpable even through the phone. Amelie smiled, her eyes softening. "Did you? I can't wait to see it when I get home." "I love you, Mommy," he said, his sweet voice filling Amelie's heart with warmth. Her eyes grew misty, her love for him overwhelming. "I love you too, sweetheart. Be good for Anna, okay?" "I will. I promise." As the call ended, Amelie held the phone close, her fingers lingering over the screen. Roman's laughter still echoed in her ears, his innocence a stark contrast to the cold, calculating world she was navigating inside the mansion. After Roman's call, Amelie felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how challenging the days became, she would endure them for him. Yet, as she continued cleaning, her thoughts drifted back to the photo album and to Julien's haunted expression. There was more to his story, more than just the accident and his physical limitations. The scars he carried went much deeper, into places words couldn't reach. And then there was Eliza, beautiful, composed, and dangerous. Her words echoed in Amelie's mind, a reminder that danger could be hidden behind a charming smile. Amelie knew she was walking a thin line, surrounded by secrets and lies, but she was determined to protect her position, her son's future, and maybe, just maybe, break through the walls Julien had built around himself. After hanging up, Amelie felt tears welling up, a familiar sting she tried to blink away. Roman was her anchor, her source of strength, but each day away from him felt like another brick added to the wall between them. The mansion was grand and mesmerizing, but it was also isolating, a world far removed from the warmth of her little boy's laughter. Later that evening, as Amelie prepared dinner, she was startled by Julien's unexpected presence in the kitchen. He rarely came there, preferring to keep his distance, and his sudden appearance caught her off guard. "You seem different today," Julien remarked, his tone almost casual, as if testing the waters of conversation. Amelie turned to face him, her eyes searching his expression. "Different how?" Her voice was curious, no longer tinged with the submissive caution she usually employed. "Less guarded," Julien observed, his gaze lingering on her face. A faint smile played on Amelie's lips. "I'm not guarded, I just respect my work." Julian held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "That's good," he said, his voice softer, almost approving. Throughout the evening, Amelie noticed a subtle shift in Julian's demeanor. He was still reserved, his guard firmly in place, but his resistance to conversation seemed to be waning. For the first time, she sensed a faint crack in the walls he'd built around himself. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to trust her, if only a little. The next day, Amelie decided to take a risk, her mind replaying their brief exchange in the kitchen. During the usual morning bath, she spoke up, her voice light but earnest. "Have you ever thought about spending some time in the garden?" Julian's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "You bringing that up again?" Undeterred, Amelie shrugged, trying to keep her tone casual. "Fresh air does wonders. It might be good for you." For a moment, Julian looked at her as if weighing her intentions. His jaw tightened, and she thought he was about to refuse, but then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders softened. "Fine," he muttered, his voice reluctant but yielding. Amelie seized the opportunity. Within minutes they were outside, surrounded by blooming flowers and towering trees. The morning air was crisp, the sky scattered with lazy clouds. Julian seemed tense at first, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair as if preparing for an escape. But as the minutes passed, Amelie noticed his shoulders relax, his posture easing. His gaze drifted upward, his eyes tracing the pattern of clouds above. For a long while they stood in silence, the gentle breeze brushing against their faces. "I used to come here often," Julian's voice was low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "Before the accident, this was my favorite place." Amelie glanced at him, her eyes softening. "It still can be. Nothing's been completely taken from you. Sometimes you just have to rediscover what makes you feel good." Julian's hands relaxed on the armrests, his fingers uncurling. He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. For Amelie, that was enough. It was a small victory, but it was a step forward. The morning was cold, but bright, sunlight flooding Julian's room as Amelie adjusted the curtains. She moved quietly, her presence practiced and unobtrusive. Julian watched her from his wheelchair, his gaze distant, his thoughts seemingly far away. "Good morning, sir," Amelie greeted, her voice gentle as she turned to face him. Julian looked up, his eyes focusing on her. For a moment he said nothing, his face impassive. But there was something different about him, an almost imperceptible softness in his demeanor, as if the walk in the garden had loosened the chains he kept so tightly wound. His mouth twitched, barely a smile but enough to make Amelie's heart lift. "Morning," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. Amelie continued her work, the room basking in the soft glow of sunlight. It was a simple moment, easily overlooked, but to her it was a breakthrough. Julian's walls were still there, formidable and high, but for the first time she could see the faintest cracks. She realized then that trust wasn't built in grand gestures, but in these small, quiet moments of connection. And maybe, just maybe, Julian was learning that too. "Good morning," Julian finally replied, his tone neutral but devoid of its usual coldness. Amelie felt a flicker of hope. With Julian, progress was subtle, tiny shifts that spoke louder than words. She was learning to read between the lines, to notice the nuances that hinted at the man behind the walls. As Amelie adjusted Julian's equipment for his morning bath, a faint noise echoed from the hallway. At first, she thought it was Aurora, but when she opened the door, she was met with a familiar face. "Roman?" Amelie whispered, crouching down to her son's level. "What are you doing here? Anna wasn't supposed to let you come on your own." Roman looked up, his eyes wide and earnest, his small hands clutching a rolled-up piece of paper. "I missed you, Mommy. I wanted to see you." Amelie felt a rush of emotion, expiration mingling with tenderness. She understood his longing. She felt it too, every day. But she also knew this wasn't the place or time for surprises. Before she could usher him out, another figure appeared in the hallway. Julian watched the scene unfold with an unreadable expression, his eyes flicking from Amelie to Roman. Roman, however, seemed entirely unfazed by the imposing figure in the wheelchair. His curiosity was pure and unfiltered, his head tilting as he took in Julian's presence. "Are you the man in the chair?" Roman asked bluntly, his voice filled with innocent curiosity. Julian's eyes widened ever so slightly before his expression settled into one of mild surprise. "I am," he answered, his voice calm and even. Without hesitation, Roman took a step closer, extending his small hands to reveal the drawing. "I made this for my mom, but I think you might like it too." Amelie's heart skipped a beat. "Roman, that's not appropriate." "Let him." Julian's voice was gentle, his tone almost inviting. It was the first time Amelie heard anything close to softness from him. He took the drawing from Roman's outstretched hands, unfolding it carefully. His eyes lingered on the vibrant colors and childlike shapes, his expression softening as he took in the unguarded innocence of Roman's art. For a brief moment, Amelie saw it, the faintest shadow of a smile playing on Julian's lips. It was fleeting, but it was there, a glimpse of the man he must have been before the accident. "Do you like to draw?" Julian asked, his voice lower, almost contemplative. Roman's face lit up, his eyes sparkling. "Yes, when I grow up I want to be an artist. Mommy says I'm very creative." Julian's eyes flicked to Amelie, a glimmer of understanding passing between them before he turned back to Roman. "Then don't lose that. A lot of people do as they grow older." Roman nodded solemnly, as if accepting a profound truth. "I won't." Amelie stood there, speechless, watching the unlikely exchange unfold before her. She had never seen Julian like this, unguarded, almost human. The man who built walls around himself was letting a child's innocence seep through the cracks. After Anna arrived to take Roman back home, Amelie returned to Julian's room. She found him still holding the drawing, his eyes distant, lost in thought. The colorful paper lay on his lap, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the lines. "Your son is interesting," Julian remarked, his voice neutral but laced with something softer. Amelie's chest tightened with pride. "He's my strength. Everything I do is for him." Julien didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained on the drawing, his expression contemplative. "You should have brought him sooner," he murmured almost to himself. "He has something most people here are missing." Amelie's heart skipped. Julien looked up, his gaze meeting hers. "Hope." His voice was raw, as if the word itself was fragile. Uncomplicated, untainted hope. Amelie stood in silence, unsure how to respond. She had never heard Julian speak with such vulnerability before. For a moment, the room felt warmer, the light from the window casting a golden glow around them. Julian placed the drawing on the table beside him, his fingers lingering on the paper. "He's lucky to have you," he added quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Amelie's breath caught in her throat. It was the closest thing to a compliment she had ever received from him. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft, sincere. Julian's expression shifted, his walls rising once more. "Don't mention it," he muttered, turning his chair away. But as he wheeled toward the window, his posture was more relaxed, his shoulders less burdened. Amelie watched him in silence, a small smile playing on her lips. It was just a drawing, simple lines and bright colors, but it had managed to do what she had been trying to accomplish for weeks. It broke through to Julian, if only for a moment. And in that fleeting connection, Amelie saw hope, not just for Julian, but for herself as well. Later, as Amelie prepared dinner, she heard the sharp click of high heels echoing through the kitchen. Eliza appeared in the doorway, her presence as imposing as ever. Her eyes immediately fell on Roman's drawing, which Julian had brought into the kitchen earlier. She picked it up, holding it between her manicured fingers as if it were something distasteful. "What's this?" Eliza's voice dripped with disdain. Amelie turned, keeping her expression neutral. "It's just a drawing my son made." Her tone was calm, steady. She refused to let Eliza see any sign of weakness. Eliza let out a short, cold laugh. Julian always did have a knack for surrounding himself with unusual people. Amelie felt anger flare up inside her, hot and sharp, but she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. She knew exactly what Eliza was doing, baiting her, testing her resolve. Amelie wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do," she said evenly, turning back to the stove, her hands steady even as her heart raced. Eliza's heels clicked against the tile as she stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. "You might think you're gaining ground here, but don't be naive. You're temporary. I, on the other hand, am permanent." Amelie's fingers tightened around the spoon she was holding, but she didn't turn around. She kept stirring, her voice even and unaffected. "We'll see about that." Eliza's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing her face, but she merely scoffed and turned to leave, her exit as dramatic as her entrance. As the echo of her footsteps faded, Amelie allowed herself to breathe. Eliza's words echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them take root. She was here for Roman, and no threat from Eliza would change that. Later that night, Amelie found Julian alone in the library, his wheelchair angled toward the window. He held an open book in his lap, but his eyes were distant, unfocused. He looked as if he were miles away, lost in thoughts he couldn't escape. "Is everything all right, sir?" Amelie asked softly, keeping her distance but allowing her concern to show. Julian didn't look at her. His eyes remained on the window, his voice low and contemplative. "Do you think people can change?" The question took Amelie by surprise. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Yes, I believe they can, but it takes effort, and not everyone is willing to try." Julian's shoulders tensed, his fingers tightening on the edges of his wheelchair. "And what if they don't want to change? What if they've already lost everything that mattered?" His voice wavered, just for a moment, revealing a depth of pain Amelie hadn't expected. She took a step closer, her voice softening. "Maybe they just need someone to show them that there's still something worth fighting for." Julian turned his head, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. There was a vulnerability there, a rawness she had never seen before. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence heavy and meaningful. Then, almost imperceptibly, Julian's gaze softened. It was fleeting, a shadow of emotion that disappeared as quickly as it came. He turned his chair away, his voice low and guarded. "Good night, Amelie." Amelie watched him in silence, her heart heavy. For the first time, she saw the cracks in his armor, the fractured pieces of a man who once had hope, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see them too. The next morning, Amelie walked into the kitchen and found an envelope waiting on the counter. Her name was scrawled on the front in sharp, jagged letters. She felt a chill run down her spine as she opened it. Inside was another note, more direct than the last. "Leave while you still can." Amelie's hands shook as she read the words, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She felt the familiar weight of fear pressing down on her, but she refused to be intimidated. Not now, not when she was fighting for Roman's future. She showed the note to Aurora, who looked visibly shaken. "This has gone too far. I'm going to talk to Julian. He needs to know what's happening." Amelie shook her head, her voice firm. "No, I don't want to cause trouble. Whoever it is, they're trying to scare me. I won't give them the satisfaction. I'm here for my son, and I'm not giving up that easily." Aurora hesitated, worry etched across her face. "Just be careful, Amelie. Not everyone in this house has good intentions." Amelie nodded, her resolve hardening. She already knew that, but she wasn't about to back down. Later that evening, Amelie found Julian in the garden, a rare sight on his own. He sat beneath a tall tree, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his posture unusually relaxed. The golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. "Thank you for what you did yesterday," Julian said suddenly, his voice quiet, his gaze still on the distance. Amelie blinked, surprised. "For what?" "For bringing your son. He reminded me of something I had forgotten." Amelie moved closer, her curiosity piqued. "What was that?" Julian's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "That there's still beauty in the world, that maybe not everything is lost." His voice was raw, tinged with a sadness that went far beyond the accident. Amelie felt her heart ache for him, realizing just how deep his wounds went. "You're right," she whispered. "Not everything is lost." For a moment, Julian's eyes met hers, and Amelie saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope. Fragile, flickering hope. "Good night, Amelie," Julian said softly, his voice almost gentle. "Good night, Julian," she replied, her heart lighter than it had been in days. As she walked back to the mansion, she glanced over her shoulder to see Julian still gazing at the horizon, his silhouette framed by the fading light. It was just a moment, a brief pause in time, but it was enough to remind her that even the most broken hearts could heal. Chloe smiled softly. "And what was that?" Julian finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "That there's still beauty, even when everything seems lost." Let's play a little game. For those who only read the comments, type pizza in the comments. Only those who make it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. Amelie walked into the kitchen early the next morning, her steps light but her heart heavy. The mansion was bathed in the pale glow of dawn, the silence almost unnerving. She found Aurora already there, brewing coffee with her usual practiced efficiency. "Good morning," Aurora greeted, handing Amelie a steaming mug. "Good morning," Amelie replied, her voice steady, though her thoughts were swirling. She took a sip, letting the warmth soothe her frayed nerves. Aurora's sharp eyes lingered on her for a moment before she spoke. "You seem tense. Is something wrong?" Amelie hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. For a brief moment, she considered confiding in Aurora about the latest note, but then she shook her head. "It's nothing, just my own worries." Aurora didn't push, but Amelie could tell she wasn't convinced. There was a knowing look in her eyes, one that spoke of secrets she kept hidden beneath her calm exterior. Amelie spent the morning tidying Julien's room. The air was cold and still, sunlight filtering softly through the curtains. Julien sat by the window, his wheelchair angled to face the garden. He was quieter than usual, his gaze distant, his face etched with a contemplative frown. Amelie had learned to recognize this look. It meant his mind was tangled in thoughts he didn't want to share, memories that haunted him even in daylight. As she straightened the sheets, his voice broke the silence. "Did you get another note?" Amelie froze, her hands pausing mid-measure. She turned slowly to face him, her heart beating faster. "How do you know about that?" Julien's eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. "Aurora mentioned it. I thought you would have told me." Amelie sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't think it was relevant. It's just someone trying to scare me." Julien tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "And you think that's something to ignore?" Amelie lifted her chin, her voice firm. "I don't want to cause any trouble." A humorless laugh escaped Julien's lips, low and bitter. "Trouble already exists in this house, Chloe, and you're not responsible for it." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Amelie felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to ask him what he meant, but the look in his eyes warned her to stay silent. There was more to this mansion than she realized, more than Julien was willing to share. At lunch, Amelie set the table in the grand dining room, arranging the silverware with meticulous care. The atmosphere was tense, charged with an undercurrent she couldn't quite place. She had just finished setting the last glass when Eliza swept into the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor with purpose. She held an envelope in her manicured fingers, her expression carefully composed, but her eyes flicked toward Amelie with a barely concealed disdain. Amelie stiffened, keeping her head down as Eliza took her seat beside Julien. Her posture was perfect, her smile poised, but there was something sharp about the way she moved, as if she were a predator circling her prey. "Julien, I brought some documents for you to sign, just some adjustments to the property management," Eliza said, her voice smooth and practiced. She handed him the envelope, her smile unwavering. Julien looked at the envelope, but didn't take it immediately. His eyes flicked to Eliza's face, his expression cautious. "Documents, Eliza?" His tone was light, almost casual, but Amelie heard the underlying suspicion. Eliza's smile never wavered, but her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the envelope. "Just routine paperwork. I thought it would be easier if I brought it to you directly." Julien's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer before he reached for the envelope. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the pages with meticulous care. Amelie watched out of the corner of her eye, her movements careful and quiet. She could feel the tension in the room, a charged silence that seemed to stretch with every second. Julien's jaw tightened as he read, his fingers gripping the paper just a little too hard. "Interesting," he said finally, his voice cold. "Why didn't you mention this sooner?" Eliza's smile faltered just for a moment. "I didn't want to bother you with details. You have enough on your mind." Julien's eyes flicked up, his gaze piercing. "And yet, you found it necessary to bring it to me today. Why is that?" Eliza's composure wavered, her smile stiffening. "I just thought it would be more efficient." Julien's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "Efficient, of course." He placed the papers back in the envelope, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "I'll look over them later." Eliza opened her mouth as if to argue but seemed to think better of it. She stood gracefully, her expression smooth once more. Very well, let me know if you have any questions. Her eyes flicked to Amelie, a cold warning hidden in their depths. I'll leave you to your responsibilities. As she left, the room felt colder, the air heavier. Amelie's hands shook as she cleared the table, her mind racing. She had never seen Julian so guarded, so deliberately cautious. Be careful around Eliza. Julian's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone low and serious. She doesn't like losing control. Amelie looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. I gathered that much. Julian's face was impassive, but his eyes were hard. This house is full of secrets, Chloe. Be sure you don't become one of them. Amelie swallowed, her heart pounding. The warning was clear, but she wasn't about to back down. Not now. I won't, she promised, her voice firm. I'm not that easy to get rid of. Julian's lips twitched, almost a smile. Good. For a brief moment their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. They were both fighting battles within the walls of this mansion. Different battles, but battles all the same. And maybe, just maybe, they were on the same side. Now, it's important, Eliza insisted, her voice steady, though a flicker of anxiety danced in her eyes. Amelie watched the exchange from a distance, her movements slow and deliberate as she arranged the dishes. There was something off about Eliza's demeanor, an underlying tension that was almost palpable. Julian finally took the envelope from Eliza's outstretched hand, but didn't open it. Instead, he placed it on the table beside him, his fingers lingering on the edge, as if weighing its significance. His gaze shifted to Eliza, his expression neutral but unyielding. Why don't we discuss this later? Julian's voice was calm, almost dismissive. For now, I'd prefer to have lunch in peace. Eliza's smile was perfectly practiced, but her eyes betrayed her displeasure. Of course, she murmured, her tone sweet but hollow. She sat gracefully, her posture rigid, her hands clasped a little too tightly. Amelie watched the exchange from the corner of her eye, her curiosity growing. It was clear that whatever was in that envelope had rattled Eliza, and Julian knew it. Later, as Amelie prepared Julian's afternoon tea, her phone vibrated with a familiar number. She smiled, her heart lifting as she answered the call. Mommy, today I made a drawing of you and the man in the chair. Roman's voice was bright, his excitement infectious. Amelie's heart softened. Really? I can't wait to see it when I get home. Are you happy at work, Mommy? Roman's innocent question made her pause, her fingers tightening around the phone. For a moment, she considered the complexities of her answer. She thought about the notes, the threats, and the tension lurking behind every corner of the mansion. But she also thought of Roman's smile, his laughter, and the future she was fighting to build for him. I am, sweetheart. I'm doing this for us, she said softly, forcing herself to sound cheerful. After hanging up, Amelie leaned against the counter, her heart heavy. Roman was her strength, her purpose, but she knew she had to protect him from the weight of her struggles. She blinked back the sting of tears, taking a deep breath. She wouldn't let anything threaten her chance at a better life for Roman. Not Eliza, not the notes, not even Julian's guarded world. In the early afternoon, Amelie found Julian in the library, the envelope from Eliza resting on his lap. He was staring at it, his fingers tapping absently against the paper, his eyes distant and unfocused. Amelie approached quietly, her presence gentle, unintrusive. Would you like your tea here, sir? Julian looked up, his gaze clearing. He nodded, his expression contemplative. Yes, that would be fine. As she set the tray on the table, Julian spoke, his voice low. She's always trying to control everything. Amelie glanced at him, her curiosity piqued. Who? Julian's lips pressed into a thin line. Eliza. His tone was a mix of irritation and exhaustion. She acts like she's helping, like she's concerned about me, but she's only interested in what she can take. Amelie didn't respond immediately, sensing his need to vent. She continued pouring the tea, her movements calm and measured. Before the accident, I thought I understood people, Julian continued, his voice growing distant. I thought I knew who was loyal and who was just here for themselves. Amelie looked up, her eyes gentle. And now? Julian's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening. Now, I see things for what they really are. The accident wasn't what broke me, Amelie. It was the people around me. Amelie's heart ached at the rawness of his confession. She could see the pain behind his bitterness, the wounds that ran far deeper than his physical injuries. For the first time, she realized just how alone he truly felt. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she knew Julian wouldn't accept pity. Instead, she spoke quietly, her voice steady. "I'm here to work, Julian, but I'm also here to listen, if you ever need that." Julian's eyes flicked to hers, a spark of surprise breaking through his guarded expression. But he didn't respond. He simply looked away, his fingers tightening on the envelope. "Thank you," he murmured, so softly she almost missed it. Emily's chest tightened, but she merely nodded. "Anytime." Later, as Amelie was tidying the living room, she heard hurried footsteps approaching. She turned just as Eliza stormed in, her eyes blazing with anger. "You have something that belongs to me." Eliza's voice was low, dangerously calm. Emily's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." Eliza's eyes narrowed, her lips curving into a cold smile. "Don't play innocent. If you think you can make a place for yourself here, you're mistaken. People like you don't belong in this world." Amelie's pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. "I'm here to work, nothing more. I don't want trouble." Eliza took a step closer, her face inches from Amelie's. "Then stay away from Julian. Whatever you're trying to do, it won't work. I won't let you get in my way." Amelie held her gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just doing my job." Eliza's eyes gleamed with malice. "True. And one more thing." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The next note you get might not be so friendly." A chill ran down Emily's spine, but she didn't flinch. She forced herself to remain calm, to keep her composure. "I won't be intimidated," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." Eliza's face hardened, her eyes flashing with fury, but she merely straightened, her demeanor icy and composed once more. "We'll see about that." With a final, piercing glare, Eliza turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The sound echoed in the empty room, lingering long after she was gone. Amelie exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. She pressed a hand to her chest, forcing herself to breathe. Eliza was dangerous, more dangerous than she'd realized. But Amelie wouldn't be scared away. She wouldn't let anyone threaten her chance to build a better life for Roman. She looked at the doorway where Eliza had stood, her eyes hardening. "Bring it on," she whispered, her resolve solidifying. "I'm not leaving without a fight." At the end of the day, Amelie made a decision. The situation with Eliza was more than she could handle alone, and the threats were growing bolder. She couldn't carry the weight of it in silence any longer. Julian needed to know. She found him in the garden, his silhouette framed by the evening sky, shades of pink and gold reflecting off the clouds. He looked peaceful, his posture relaxed, his eyes distant as if searching for something beyond the horizon. Amelie took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice firm as she approached. Julian turned to face her, his expression instantly sharpening. He noted the seriousness in her voice, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" Amelie hesitated, but only for a moment. She recounted everything. The notes, Eliza's threats, and their confrontation in the living room. She spared no detail, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Julian listened in complete silence, his jaw tightening with every revelation. His eyes grew darker, his face hardening into a mask of anger. When she finished, there was a moment of tense silence before he finally spoke. "Eliza has always been good at manipulating people. She thrives on control, but with me, that ends now." His voice was low, cold, resolute. Amelie's heart raced at the intensity in his gaze. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Julian's eyes softened just slightly as he looked at her, his expression guarded but sincere. "I'll handle it my way, but while you're here, you're under my protection. Don't let Eliza intimidate you." Amelie's chest tightened, warmth blooming at his unexpected show of support. "Thank you, Julian." He didn't reply, but his nod was enough. For the first time, she felt a fragile thread of trust forming between them, a silent understanding that they were on the same side. The next day, Amelie followed her routine as usual, though the tension in the air was palpable. Every glance felt loaded, every movement calculated. Eliza's threats echoed in her mind, but she remembered Julian's words and held her head high. As she prepared Julian's bath equipment, she noticed that he was unusually quiet. It wasn't his typical cold silence, but something deeper, more reflective. "Are you all right, sir?" Amelie asked gently, adjusting the shower bench with practiced ease. Julian looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if considering her question. "You always ask that." Molly smiled softly, her tone light. "It's part of the job." Julian's lips twitched into a brief smile. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just a moment of genuine amusement. "I suppose it is." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of running water. But then Julian spoke, his voice thoughtful, distant. "Have you ever believed you could do something impossible?" The question caught Amelie off guard. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "Yes, many times, and in some of those times I actually did." Julian's expression softened, his gaze thoughtful. Maybe I should try too." Amelie's heart swelled, hope flickering in her chest. "I think that would be a good idea." That morning's bath was different. Julian seemed more relaxed, more willing to accept her help. There were no sharp remarks, no guarded silence. He allowed her to assist him, his movements more cooperative, his posture less rigid. When they finished, Julian looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before, a mixture of curiosity and vulnerability. "Do you believe I could stand up one day?" Amelie's breath caught, her heart breaking at the rawness in his voice. There was no arrogance, no pretense, just a man stripped bare of his defenses, asking for hope. "I believe you can do anything as long as you're willing to try," she answered, her voice steady and sincere. "It won't be easy, but it's not impossible." Julian held her gaze for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if looking for reassurance. Then, slowly, he nodded. Maybe I will." His words were soft, almost hesitant, but Amelie heard the hope behind them. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. Without another word, Julian turned his wheelchair and left the bathroom, his posture straighter, his shoulders less burdened. Amelie watched him go, her chest tightening with a mixture of pride and empathy. Later that morning, Julian asked Amelie to meet him in the physical therapy room, a place she had never seen him use before. The room was spacious, filled with parallel bars, weights, and various rehabilitation tools, all neatly organized but covered in a thin layer of dust. Julian positioned his wheelchair near the parallel bars, his hands resting on the grips. His arms were tense, his fingers flexing nervously. "I want to try something," he announced, his voice firm. Molly's eyes widened, her heart racing. "Are you sure, sir? I don't want you to get hurt." "I'm already hurt," Julian interrupted, his voice hard but not unkind. "What more could happen?" Amelie swallowed, understanding the pain behind his words. She nodded, stepping closer, her hands ready to assist. "I'm here to help." Julian took a deep breath, his shoulders trembling with effort. He gripped the bars tightly, his muscles straining as he tried to lift himself, his face contorted with pain, his arms shaking, but he didn't stop. Amelie moved behind him, her hands lightly supporting his back. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice steady. "Take it slow." Julian's body trembled, his breaths ragged, but he pushed through the pain, his determination fierce. For a brief moment, he managed to lift his torso, his weight shifting forward. It was brief, just a few inches, but it was enough to feel the ground beneath his feet. His eyes widened, his breath catching. I felt it." His voice was choked, his eyes shining with disbelief. "I felt it." Amelie's heart soared, tears pricking her eyes. "That's amazing, Julian. This is just the beginning." Julian looked at her, his face etched with exhaustion, but also hope, a glimmer of light breaking through the shadows. Maybe it is." Amelie helped him back into his wheelchair, her hands gentle, her heart full. As she secured his seatbelt, Julian's eyes lingered on her, his expression softening. "Thank you for believing in me." Amelie smiled, her voice warm. "Always." As they left the room, Julian's posture was different, prouder, lighter. It was just one small victory, but it was enough to ignite hope, and for the first time, Amelie truly believed that Julian's fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Eliza entered the room, her eyes blazing with irritation. Amelie was "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. Julian looked up, his eyes locking onto hers with newfound determination. "I'm taking back what's mine, something you never believed I could do." Eliza's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "Is this your idea?" She turned her glare to Amelie, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess, you think you can save the world?" Amelie remained calm, her voice steady. "This was Mr. Foster's idea, and he's making incredible progress." Eliza laughed bitterly, her gaze flicking back to Julian. "Progress? He can't even stand on his own. This isn't progress, it's delusion." Before Amelie could respond, Julian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Enough, Eliza. I'm tired of hearing you tear everything down. You're not here to help me, you never were. You're only here for yourself." A flash of surprise crossed Eliza's face, her confidence wavering. But it lasted only a second before her expression hardened, her eyes cold. "Believe whatever you want, Julian. Just don't say I didn't warn you." She cast one final look of disdain at Amelie before spinning on her heel and leaving the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The tension in the air lingered even after she was gone. Amelie let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Are you all right, sir?" Julian's shoulders relaxed, his posture softening. "I am now." For the first time, Amelie saw a flicker of peace on his face. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later, as Amelie prepared lunch, her phone buzzed. Roman's voice instantly brightened her mood. "Mommy, today I drew a picture of a strong man. It's you and the man in the chair together." Roman's pride was palpable even through the phone. Amelie laughed, her heart swelling with love. "Really? I can't wait to see it. Are you being good?" "Yes, Mommy, but I miss you." His voice softened, the vulnerability of his words tugging at her heart. Amelie blinked back tears, forcing her voice to stay light. "I miss you too, my love, but we'll be together soon, I promise." After hanging up, Amelie leaned against the counter, the ache of missing him growing sharper. Roman was her strength, her reason for every sacrifice, but each day apart felt harder than the last. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had to be strong. For him. In the afternoon, Amelie found Julian in the garden, his wheelchair positioned beneath a sprawling oak tree. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, his expression contemplative, his shoulders relaxed. He looked more at peace than she had ever seen him. "Thank you for what you did today," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the sky. Amelie blinked, surprised. "You're the one who did it. I was just there to help." Julian's lips curved into a faint smile. "You have a gift, Amelie. You make people believe in themselves." Amelie felt her cheeks warm, caught off guard by his sincerity. "It's the least I can do," she replied, sitting down beside him. Julian was silent for a moment, his eyes still on the horizon. "Have you ever thought that maybe you're here for a bigger reason?" Amelie looked at him, her brows knitting in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Maybe you're not just here to work. Maybe it's something more." His voice was distant, his words layered with meaning she couldn't quite decipher. Amelie's heart skipped, her curiosity sparking, but before she could press for more, Julian turned away, his expression guarded once more. "Forget it," he murmured. "I was just thinking out loud." But Amelie knew there was more to his words. She watched him in silence, realizing that Julian was beginning to believe again, not just in himself, but in something bigger. At the end of the day, as Amelie finished her tasks, Aurora approached, her eyes wide with surprise. "I heard what happened in the therapy room. Did Julian really try to stand up?" Amelie's face broke into a proud smile. "Yes, and he managed for a moment, just for a moment, but it was enough." Aurora's eyes widened, a look of awe crossing her face. "He's never tried that before. I think you're really making a difference." Amelie looked down, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "I'm just doing my job." Aurora shook her head. "No, you're doing much more than that." Amelie's smile grew, warmth blooming in her chest. She realized then that she wasn't just changing Julian's life. He was changing hers too. The next morning began under heavy gray clouds, the air thick with anticipation. Amelie moved through her routine, her mind preoccupied with the confrontation from the previous day. She knew Eliza wouldn't take it lightly, but she was determined to push forward. As she prepared breakfast, Aurora walked in, her face pale, an envelope clutched tightly in her hands. "Another note," Aurora whispered, her voice trembling as she handed it over. Amelie opened it carefully, her stomach nodding as she read the words, "Leave before it's too late." A chill ran down her spine. The message was shorter this time, but the threat was unmistakable. Aurora's face tightened with worry. "This is getting dangerous. You need to tell Mr. Foster." Molly hesitated, her fingers curling around the paper. But she knew Aurora was right. It was time to face the situation head-on. She found Julian in the library, his wheelchair positioned near the window, a book open on his lap. But his eyes were unfocused, his thoughts far away. "Sir," Amelie began, her voice steady as she approached. "We need to talk." Julian looked up, his eyes sharpening as he saw the note in her hand. He took it from her, his jaw tightening as he read the words. "Eliza," he muttered, his voice low, his expression cold. Amelie shook her head. "We don't know for sure." "I do," Julian interrupted, his eyes flashing. "This is her style, hints manipulation. She wants control. She always has." Amelie's chest tightened. "But why? What does she get out of this?" Julian's gaze turned dark, his voice hardening. "Money, power, everything she's afraid of losing." Amelie felt a shiver run down her spine. "What should we do?" Julian's eyes gleamed with resolve. "Leave it to me. She's crossed the line, and this time, she won't get away with it." His voice was cold, determined, a fire burning behind his eyes. For the first time, Amelie saw the man he used to be, a man who wouldn't back down, and she knew Eliza was about to face the fight of her life. In the early afternoon, Julian asked Amelie to join him in the physical therapy room. His eyes burned with determination, a fire she hadn't seen before. It was as if the threats, the manipulation, and the betrayal had ignited something deep within him, a defiance that refused to be extinguished. "Today, we're trying again," he announced, positioning his wheelchair beside the parallel bars. Amelie nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. She helped him prepare, securing the bars and adjusting his chair. Julian's face was tense, his jaw set as he gripped the bars with white-knuckled hands. "You can do this, sir," Amelie encouraged, her voice steady, unwavering. Julian took a deep breath, his shoulders trembling with effort as he pulled himself up. His arms strained, muscles shaking, but he didn't let go. Slowly, painfully, his torso lifted higher than before. His legs remained motionless, but his upper body stood tall, supported by his own strength. His face was flushed, his breathing labored, but a triumphant smile broke through. I didn't think I could do that." Amelie's eyes shone with pride. "Now you know you can." She helped him settle back into his wheelchair, her hands gentle, supportive. For a moment, Julian just sat there, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then his face softened, his smile growing. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. Prepare yourself for part 2, where truths will be revealed, justice will be pursued, and the battle for love and redemption will reach its climax. Did you enjoy this story? If so, drop a like and leave a kind comment to encourage us. Your support means the world. And don't forget, we love you. To be continued.